Elena had never expected that a single act of kindness could turn her life upside down. She was a woman who had once believed in the power of hard work and resilience. But over the past year, the weight of grief and hardship had made her question everything. Since the passing of her beloved husband, John, Elena had been drowning in a sea of responsibilities. Her husband's medical bills, the struggling family restaurant, and the crumbling house she had inherited from her parents. Despite the effort she put into each day, nothing seemed to go right, and the future seemed an endless void. Maria's Kitchen, once a thriving business, had become a shadow of its former self. John had always been the one to keep things afloat. He had a knack for hospitality, a way of making everyone who stepped into Maria's Kitchen feel like family. The two of them had built their restaurant from the ground up, and they had worked side by side, turning their love for food and community into a thriving business. But after John passed away suddenly from a heart attack, the weight of responsibility fell squarely on Elena's shoulders. It was as if the heart of the business had died along with him. The restaurant, located in a small town where everyone knew everyone's name, used to be the place to go for a warm meal and lively conversation. People would gather there to share their lives, and it was not uncommon for Elena and John to join in the conversation over a cup of coffee with regulars. But now, Maria's Kitchen sat empty most nights, with only a few patrons trickling in during the day. Elena did her best to keep the business running, but the days felt longer, and the nights colder. The house, too, was beginning to fall apart. It was a large, old place, a symbol of the life Elena had shared with her husband. The kitchen had once been the heart of their home, filled with the smell of freshly baked bread and John's hearty soups. But now, the peeling wallpaper, creaky floors, and broken heating system served as constant reminders of her own fragility and the impossibility of managing it all alone. But life has a way of surprising you, even when you're least prepared for it. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elena was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup when she heard the soft rattle of the back door. The town was quiet, as it usually was after the sun set, and Elena had grown accustomed to the silence of the restaurant. But tonight, something was different. She heard a soft scratching sound at the door, followed by a low whine. She didn't expect anyone. She hadn't had a delivery in days. Hesitant but curious, she wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door. There, standing in the doorway, was a dog, a large, scruffy creature with sad, soulful eyes and matted fur. He was dirty, thin, and appeared to be hungry. His body language was not aggressive, but rather a quiet plea for help. Elena stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. She had always been a dog lover, and despite her many challenges, she couldn't bring herself to turn away an animal in need. Slowly, she crouched down, speaking in a gentle voice, "Hey there, boy. You look like you need something to eat." The dog didn't move at first, but after a few moments, he cautiously took a step forward, his tail wagging in tentative recognition. Elena smiled softly and went back inside, pulling a bowl of leftover stew from the fridge. She placed it by the back door and waited. The dog sniffed the air, then hungrily devoured the food as if he hadn't eaten in days. For a while, Elena simply watched him. His coat was patchy, and his ribs were visible beneath his matted fur. Yet, there was something in his eyes, an intelligence, a sadness, and an understanding that made her heart ache. She knelt down next to him, unsure of what else to do, and spoke softly, "You look like you've had a rough time." The dog stopped eating and looked up at her, as if understanding every word. Elena could feel a wave of sympathy wash over her. It was as though, in some unspoken way, this dog had arrived at the exact moment when she needed him most. She hadn't realized how lonely she had become until this very moment. She hadn't realized how much she needed a companion. "What should I call you?" she murmured to herself, smiling at the thought of naming a dog when she had so many other worries. The dog, with his ragged fur and quiet dignity, looked like a Kabir, a name that meant brave in a language Elena had learned as a child. It was the perfect fit. "Kabir," she said aloud, and the dog perked up at the sound of his name. The next day, Kabir returned to the restaurant, and the day after that, and the day after that. Each time, Elena found herself looking forward to his visits. She began to leave food out for him, and in return, he kept her company during the long hours she spent alone in the kitchen. It was as though their lives had intersected at exactly the right time, like two souls who had found solace in each other. Elena had never been one to believe in fate, but something about Kabir's presence seemed more than just coincidence. In him, she found a companion who needed her as much as she needed him. There was a silent understanding between them, one that went beyond words. When she was lonely, Kabir was there. When she felt overwhelmed by the weight of her struggles, he was there, his soft eyes offering comfort in ways words could not. She often found herself talking to him as she worked, telling him about her day, her fears, her dreams for the future. And though he didn't answer, there was a sense of peace in knowing she wasn't truly alone. One afternoon, Elena was sitting at the counter, working on the restaurant's books when Marco, one of her longtime customers, came in. Marco had been a regular at Maria's kitchen since the early days of the restaurant. A widower himself, Marco was a man of few words, but his quiet kindness had made him one of Elena's most trusted allies. He had noticed how things had changed at the restaurant, how quiet it had become, how Elena seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Hey, Elena," Marco said, settling into his usual seat at the counter. "How's the restaurant been going?" Elena glanced up, trying to hide her exhaustion. "You know, it's been tough. I'm trying to keep things afloat, but it feels like I'm fighting a losing battle." Marco studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You're a strong woman, Elena. I know that. But you don't have to do this all by yourself. The town's behind you. We're all here for you. You just need to ask." Elena gave him a weak smile. "I don't know, Marco. It just feels like no matter how hard I try, nothing's changing. The bills keep piling up, and I don't even know where to start. It's like I'm stuck in the same place, spinning my wheels." Marco's eyes softened. "Maybe what you need is a little help, and a little hope." It was then that Marco made a suggestion that would change everything. "You know, Elena, you don't have to face this alone. There's an apartment above the restaurant. It's small, but it's warm, and I think it would be a good place for you to stay. The restaurant is yours, and you shouldn't be spending all your time in that big house on your own." Elena hesitated. "I don't know, Marco. It just feels like so much. It's hard to accept help." "I understand," Marco said gently. "But sometimes, the best way to move forward is by letting others help you take that first step." It took some convincing, but Elena eventually agreed. She had always prided herself on her independence, but there was something in Marco's words that resonated with her. Maybe it was time to let others in, to stop carrying everything alone. The apartment was small, but it was cozy and warm, and the thought of living above the restaurant filled her with a sense of comfort she hadn't known in months. The move was a turning point. The community had rallied around her in ways Elena hadn't imagined possible. People who had once been customers now became friends and allies. They helped her clean, helped her fix the leaks, and even chipped in for the renovations she needed. And through it all, Kabir remained by her side, his steady presence offering quiet support as she navigated these changes. That evening, when Elena looked around her new home, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She sat down with Kabir at her feet, smiling as he rested his head on her lap. She knew that this was just the beginning, that somehow, the small act of kindness from a stray dog had set in motion a journey of healing and rediscovery. As she wrote in her journal that night, she realized that perhaps she had been wrong all along. Maybe life didn't always follow a predictable path. Maybe sometimes the greatest blessings come in the most unexpected forms. And sometimes the first step toward healing is simply allowing someone, or something, to walk through your door. As the weeks passed, Elena began to feel the weight of her loss in a different way. At first, there had been a numbness, a kind of emotional distance that had made everything feel like it was happening to someone else. But now, as she adjusted to her new life in the apartment above the restaurant, a quiet transformation was taking place. The simple act of living day to day in the same space where she had shared so many memories with John started to heal her in ways she couldn't have imagined. The days grew shorter as the fall season deepened into winter, and the chill in the air seemed to awaken something inside Elena. Kabir, ever by her side, had become a constant source of comfort and companionship. With his large, soulful eyes and gentle nature, he had quickly become a beloved part of her life. But it was more than just the companionship that he provided. It was the unwavering sense of loyalty he offered. When Elena found herself wrestling with difficult thoughts or overwhelmed by the sheer weight of her responsibilities, Kabir's presence anchored her. He was her silent confidant, always there when the world seemed too loud or too lonely. One cold November afternoon, as Elena worked alone in the kitchen, she overheard the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. It was early, and the restaurant was usually quiet at this time of day, so Elena was surprised to see a figure enter. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the front. "Hello," she called out, peeking through the kitchen door. Standing in the entryway was a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, looking slightly disheveled, as though she had been traveling for hours. She wore a faded jacket, and her eyes were red, swollen, and tired. She looked like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, her voice soft but with an edge of desperation. "I heard this was a place where people helped. I didn't know where else to go." Elena took in the woman's appearance and immediately recognized the pain in her eyes. She had seen that look before, the same one she had seen in herself not long ago. Elena stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron as she smiled gently. "Of course, come in. You're not bothering me at all. How can I help?" The woman hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, looking around nervously. I don't really know where to start," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm Emily. I've been living on the streets for the past month. I was staying with my boyfriend, but things got bad. I couldn't stay there anymore." Elena listened carefully, her heart aching as Emily continued to explain her situation. Emily was just another face in the crowd of people who had fallen through the cracks of society. Someone who, like so many others, had found themselves without a support system, without a way to get back on their feet. "Well, Emily, you've come to the right place," Elena said gently. "I can't promise everything will be easy, but we'll figure something out." Elena invited Emily to sit down and offered her a cup of hot tea. It was the least she could do to offer comfort to someone who seemed to have lost so much. As they talked, Elena learned that Emily had come from a small town nearby but had ended up in the city, hoping to find work and a better life. But things hadn't gone as planned. She had ended up on the streets, struggling to find a place to sleep, food to eat, and a sense of safety. As the conversation continued, Elena found herself thinking about her own struggles, how she, too, had once felt like there was no way out, no one to lean on. It was only through the kindness of others that she had managed to survive, and now, she had the opportunity to do the same for someone else. "I'm going to help you," Elena said firmly, her voice steady. "I know what it's like to feel lost. You don't have to do this alone." Over the next several weeks, Elena began to see how much of a difference small acts of kindness could make in the lives of others. Emily began to work part-time at the restaurant, helping with the dishes, serving customers, and cleaning up after hours. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Elena saw the change in Emily's demeanor. The woman's shoulders, once hunched with the weight of the world, began to straighten, and her eyes began to shine with a glimmer of hope. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to thrive. One day, after a long shift, Elena invited Emily to sit with her in the small back office of the restaurant. The winter had been harsh that year, and the restaurant had been struggling to keep up with rising costs. But Elena was determined to find a way to keep the doors open, not just for herself, but for those who had come to depend on the small community that had formed around Maria's kitchen. "Listen, Emily," Elena said as she sat across from the young woman, her brow furrowed in thought. "I know times are tough. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but we've managed to keep the restaurant going for this long because we've always stuck together as a community. And right now, I think we need to think about what more we can do to help others. People like you." Emily's eyes widened, unsure of what Elena meant. "What I'm saying is this," Elena continued. "I've been thinking about how to expand the work we're doing here. I don't know exactly what it will look like, but I believe we can do more than just feed people. We can offer them something else, a chance to stand back on their feet, a place to belong. And I think you could be part of that. The idea had been forming in Elena's mind for weeks, and now, as she spoke the words out loud, she knew she was ready to make it happen. She wanted to create a space where people like Emily, people who had fallen through the cracks, could come to heal, to rebuild their lives, and to find a community of support. "Are you serious?" Emily asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "Absolutely," Elena said, her gaze unwavering. "I'm going to call it Hope's Kitchen. It'll be a place where people can not only get a warm meal but also find guidance, support, and the resources they need to rebuild their lives." Over the next several months, Elena's vision for Hope's Kitchen began to take shape. The restaurant was already a place of community, but now it would be much more than just a restaurant. It would become a hub for people in need, whether they needed food, shelter, or simply someone to listen to them. Elena worked tirelessly, rallying volunteers, reaching out to local organizations, and spreading the word. Kabir, as always, was there, accompanying Elena during every step of the process. He became a fixture at the restaurant, his gentle presence comforting everyone who came through the door. His quiet dignity, his unspoken understanding of human pain, made him an invaluable part of the team. People began to look forward to his visits, and even those who had once been reluctant to open up to others found themselves warming to the dog's calming presence. It wasn't long before the word spread, and more people came to Hope's Kitchen. People like Rosa, a widow who had recently lost her husband and didn't know how she would manage to pay the bills. Or Henry, a man struggling with addiction who had nowhere else to go. There were countless others, people who had experienced hardship, loss, or were simply down on their luck, looking for a way back to something resembling a normal life. Each person who came through the door was met with kindness and compassion. They didn't just get a meal, they got something more. They got hope. And slowly, Elena began to see that what she had started was more than just a restaurant. It was a lifeline for people in need. Hope's Kitchen became a place of healing, not just for the people who came seeking help, but for Elena as well. She had started the journey uncertain, unsure of what would happen next. But with each person she helped, with each life she touched, she found a renewed sense of purpose. The community she had built with her restaurant was no longer just a place for people to eat. It was a place for them to heal, to grow, and to find a future they had once thought was out of reach. As winter turned to spring, Elena looked around the restaurant, her heart swelling with pride. It had been a long road, but she had found something she hadn't even known she was searching for. A new sense of belonging, a renewed belief in the power of kindness, and a community bound together by love and the shared understanding that, no matter how difficult life could be, there was always a way forward. And as she watched Kabir lying at her feet, his calm presence grounding her in this new chapter of her life, Elena knew that she had found something far more valuable than success in business or personal achievement. She had found a sense of purpose. And with that, the doors of Hope's Kitchen would remain open, welcoming anyone in need, ready to serve with warmth, compassion, and above all, love. 2 years had passed since that fateful night when Elena's life changed forever. The restaurant had undergone a transformation, and so had she. What had once been a place to simply survive, a place to work, to cook, to heal from personal loss, had evolved into something far more profound. Maria's Kitchen, now called Hope's Kitchen, was no longer just a restaurant. It was a sanctuary, a lifeline, and a testament to the power of love and community. Elena had always believed that food had the power to bring people together, to nourish not just the body but the soul. But now, she understood that the true heart of Hope's Kitchen wasn't in the food. It was in the people. It was in the connections they made, the relationships they built, and the way the simple act of sharing a meal could begin to heal even the deepest wounds. As Elena sat in her apartment, gazing out the window at the busy street below, she thought back on everything that had led her to this point. The pain of losing John still lingered, but it had softened over time. She could now look back on their years together with more gratitude than sorrow, remembering not just the loss, but the beautiful moments they had shared. And as she looked at the life she had built in his absence, at the restaurant, the community, and the family of people who had come to rely on her, she knew that the seeds of healing had been planted in a place she had never expected, Hope's Kitchen. Every day felt like a new chapter in the story of healing, not just for her, but for so many others. Elena no longer ran the restaurant by herself. The community had rallied around her, offering help and support. She wasn't just the owner anymore. She was a mentor, a friend, a mother figure to so many, and she could see the difference in the people who came through the door. One of those people was Marco, the quiet man who had once been a loyal patron and now served as Hope's Kitchen's manager. Marco had always been a steady presence in the restaurant, a man who spoke little, but whose actions spoke volumes. Elena had recognized something special in him early on, and when the time came to expand, she had asked him to take on more responsibility. Since then, Marco had blossomed into a leader, a guiding force in the kitchen and beyond. His calm demeanor and strong work ethic were exactly what Hope's Kitchen needed, and Elena was grateful every day for his support. It wasn't just Marco who had stepped up. Rosa, the widow who had once arrived at Hope's Kitchen looking for a place to eat and a way to survive, had found something more. She had become an integral part of the team, working in the garden and helping to grow the fresh vegetables and herbs that now grace the kitchen's dishes. Her quiet strength and resilience were an inspiration to everyone around her. She had a way of making people feel seen and heard, even when words were few. Rosa wasn't just a volunteer. She was a cornerstone of the community that had formed around Hope's Kitchen. The restaurant had also begun to offer informal counseling sessions. Elena, with her experience and compassion, had found herself counseling many of the people who came in, sharing stories of survival, loss, and resilience. Some days, she felt like a therapist, but more often, she simply listened. It was her listening, she realized, that made the biggest impact. People needed to feel heard, to know that their struggles were valid, and that they weren't alone. Elena had learned that sometimes, offering a warm meal and an open ear was more valuable than any piece of advice. As Hope's Kitchen grew, so did its impact. The restaurant became a hub for support, not just for those in need of food, but for those in need of connection. Elena had made sure to offer support not just to the homeless and the struggling, but to anyone who felt disconnected or isolated. It wasn't just about physical nourishment, it was about emotional nourishment too. And as word spread about the work being done at Hope's Kitchen, more and more people came to be a part of it. Volunteers arrived from all walks of life, from local schools and churches, from social workers and community leaders, each bringing their own skills and passion for helping others. It was as if the community had recognized what Elena had known all along, that when you take care of people, they take care of you in return. And that was how Hope's Kitchen had grown. Yet, as much as Elena loved what they had built, she knew that there was still so much to do. There were always new faces, new stories, new challenges. But she no longer feared those challenges. She had learned, through the many struggles of the past 2 years, that nothing was impossible when people came together. The most significant change, however, had come in the form of her connection with Kabir. 2 years ago, he had come into her life as a companion, a dog who had wandered in at just the right moment. Now, he was much more than that. He was a therapy dog, a certified healer, and a symbol of everything Elena had come to believe about family and love. Kabir had earned his therapy dog certification after months of training, and now, every Wednesday, he would accompany Elena to the local senior center, where they would spend the afternoon visiting with elderly residents. Some of the residents had Alzheimer's, others simply needed companionship, but all of them found solace in Kabir's calm demeanor. Elena had learned the healing power of animals in a way she had never understood before. There was something about the way Kabir interacted with people that made them feel safe, cared for, and unconditionally loved. Elena saw firsthand how animals could bridge the gap between words and emotions, offering comfort in ways that people sometimes couldn't. And then there was Luna and S.E., Kabir's puppies, who had grown into strong, gentle dogs in their own right. Both had followed in their father's footsteps, working with the local children's reading program, where young students practiced reading aloud to the dogs. It was always a special moment when the children would read to Luna and S.E., their eyes lighting up as the dogs listened intently, never judging, never rushing. It was an incredibly effective program that helped build confidence in struggling readers, as well as foster empathy and kindness in the children. Elena was constantly amazed at how these animals seemed to know exactly how to help people, how to offer the right kind of love when it was needed the most. One day, a young boy named Jacob came into Hope's kitchen with his mother. Jacob had been struggling with severe anxiety and had become withdrawn and isolated at school. His mother had heard about the reading program and had decided to bring him in, hoping that the dogs might help. Jacob was quiet and shy at first, reluctant to engage with anyone. But when he was introduced to Luna, everything changed. Luna gently approached him, her tail wagging in soft greeting. Jacob looked up at her and, for the first time in what seemed like forever, smiled. It was a small moment, but it was profound. Jacob began to read to Luna that day, his voice shaking at first, but slowly growing steadier as Luna sat quietly at his feet. Elena watched from a distance, her heart swelling with pride. She knew that Jacob's story wasn't unique. There were countless children and adults who had come through Hope's kitchen, struggling to find their place, to find peace. And each of them had found something, whether it was a dog, a meal, or a kind word, that helped them take that first step toward healing. It was moments like these that reminded Elena why she did what she did. It was not about the business, not about recognition or fame. It was about making a difference in someone's life, no matter how small. But the impact of Hope's Kitchen wasn't just felt in the immediate community, it rippled outward, touching more lives than Elena could have ever imagined. One of the local shelters began working with Elena to provide food and support for their residents. Local schools sent children to volunteer, helping in the garden or serving meals. Word spread to nearby towns, and soon people from all over were coming to Hope's Kitchen to experience the love and community it offered. Elena had created a space where people not only received but gave back, where kindness wasn't just a service, but a way of life. There was one particular evening that stood out to Elena, a night that perfectly encapsulated what Hope's Kitchen had become. The restaurant was filled with the usual chatter of guests enjoying their meals, but something felt different that night. It was as though the very air was charged with a sense of belonging, with people from all walks of life gathered together, sharing not just food, but stories, laughter, and the warmth of connection. Elena stood at the back of the room, watching the scene unfold, and a wave of gratitude washed over her. She had created something beautiful, something lasting. Hope's Kitchen had become more than a restaurant. It had become a family. It was a place where people came to heal, to grow, and to love, all because of a simple idea: that food, love, and compassion could change the world. And as Elena glanced down at Kabir, his head resting at her feet, she knew that they had only just begun. Hope's Kitchen was not just a place on a map. It was a movement, a living testament to the idea that, when love is the main ingredient, there is always enough to go around.